communist. So when Roland was 8 months old, we were thinking of moving out of the Des Artistes because we needed more room, and we were looking, in fact, we were looking at the Dakota, and we found a 2-bedroom apartment in the Dakota for like $50,000. Can you imagine what that apartment is worth now? Millions. But there was a Mr. Campbell, who was the head of the board in our building, and he recognized that Dad would make an excellent president of the co-op. It was a co-op. So he persuaded Dad to stay, and us. He said, look, on the 5th floor, there are 2 apartments. They're not in good shape, especially 516. It's had the guts ripped out of it, but it's a corner apartment, desirable. It has the original woodwork. It has a spiral staircase. It's not the original one. It's a metal spiral staircase. And 515 has got 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, and 516 has got 1 bedroom and a bathroom. Why don't you take them over? So we bought 515, the big one with the 2 big windows and the 2 bathrooms, and there's a kitchen downstairs and a powder room. We bought that for $35,000, and the little one that was in terrible shape for $15,000. Can you imagine? Joined them up together, and it was a big job. That took months and months, and I was in charge, hiring and firing, whatever. It was kind of fun, and saved a lot of money because I was the general contractor. I remember when Roland, I remember exactly that Roland was 8 because he was walking along, or he couldn't walk, he was creeping along the sort of passageway outside our bedroom. I and Dad were in the bedroom, and he was creeping along, and he got to the edge of the stairs and he started falling down. And I could hear him going bump, 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 bump. I was terrified, and I thought, oh my God, I hope there's a squawk at the end. Bump, wah! Great big squawk. So I knew he was okay, but that was scary. That was scary. So we bought a gate and put it across the stairs. So he was 8 months old, and John was two years older. The kids loved the apartment. They rode their tricycles around it, and when Mr. Lucatos, the carpenter, was working there, it was summer, and he had a sort of leather belt on with all his tools in it, the screwdriver, the hammer, and everything, and it was around his back, and he'd be working. And John and Roland, on their little tricycles in the nude, would go past him and pick his tools out of his leather belt. He'd reach back for his screwdriver, it would be gone. But he loved children. Greeks love children, so he forgave them. So we had all kinds of adventures with the workmen, and we painted the staircase, the spiral staircase, bright red, and we had bunk beds for the boys, and they had their own bathroom. It was blue and yellow, and it was nice. It was a lovely apartment to live in. We had fans put in because it was too expensive to air condition the whole thing. So we had air conditioners in the bedrooms, and then these big fans in the living quarters. I'm trying to think of who else lived in that building. The Campbells became good friends of ours, Mr. and Mrs. Campbell. And let's see, who else lived there? Oh, Leroy Neiman, the famous artist who painted a lot of sort of sports scenes with racehorses and football players and tennis players. He was very well known in his day, very bright, splodgy colors. He lived there, and he always had attractive women with him. On each arm, he'd have these very attractive models. He had a mustache. And I started drawing. At one point, he was very nice. He sent me to his own art dealer, I think, to see what art I could sell. Leroy Neiman. Let me think. What did you say?
Libertini.
Oh yes, of course. We made friends with the Libertinis, Richard Libertini and his actor, and his wife Melinda Dillon. Richard Libertini was in All of Me with that famous American comedian Steve Martin. He was Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin in a very funny movie called All of Me. He was the guru. He was the guru who'd capture the soul and put it into back in box. Remember, he always put the little soul back in the box. A tall, skinny guy. And he and his wife, Melinda Dillon, who was quite a well-known actress, she was later on in that movie, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind. She was the mother of the little boy who gets abducted, and then she's rushing around with Richard Dreyfuss looking for the aliens and the little boy. So anyhow, so they were in an apartment on the 3rd floor, and they were in a play called Story Theatre, Paul Sills' Story Theatre, which was a reenactment of a lot of the fairy tales by the Grimm's brothers. And so we went to see. We were invited, so we were in the front row or we were in the wings. And at that point, I think John was maybe, what, 6 years old or something. And the Libertini's son, Richie Libertini, was also the same age. So they became very good friends. And so we'd go to see Melinda and Richard in these plays. And then later on, they moved to the West Coast. I'm still in touch with her, with Melinda. What else can I say about the Des Artistes?
You owned an apartment on the 2nd floor?
Oh yes. So Dad became the head of the board. Oh, we owned an apartment. We bought an apartment on the 2nd floor for my father, with my father's money, of course. We bought an apartment on the 2nd floor, which originally was just the kitchens. So it wasn't really, it was an okay apartment, wasn't perfect layout, but it was very nice. And I had the living room papered in a nice wallpaper that looked a bit like bamboo. And the bathroom had beautiful wallpaper that looked like mimosa, yellow mimosa flowers on a white background with some tree, with some branches, whatever. And I wanted to, you know, my father said, well, we can't come for at least 6 or 9 months, whatever, so you may as well rent it out. So a woman in my building wanted to rent it for herself, and it would have been much better to rent it for her. But Ted Pugh, an actor, and a friend of Debbie Reynolds, the actress, begged us to meet with Debbie because her daughter, Carrie Fisher, had just finished learning the acting trade in England. She was at RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and she was totally unknown in America at that point. She was only maybe 18, 19, I've forgotten, 20. She was coming over from England, and Debbie wanted to find an apartment for her to live in. And at that point, Debbie was appearing in a production of, oh gosh, the title had blue in it, Little Blue Gown or Little something Blue Gown. Because although she had been quite rich, her 2nd or 3rd husband had done away with her money. He was in the shoe business. I'm not sure if I'm getting all the details right, but somehow or other he'd used up her money and she had to go back to act into her career. So she was acting in Blue Gown, Little Blue Gown, and I think she wanted her daughter nearby. So we agreed. Debbie Reynolds came to our apartment after one of her shows, and she brought Carrie Fisher with her. And I wasn't very impressed with Carrie Fisher because I had some little things arranged, you know, for them to eat, little nibblies and some nice drinks and whatever, and some crackers and things. She didn't eat anything that I offered. She had a paper bag with her with a yogurt in it. So she ate that, and she sort of didn't pay much attention to us. So I was a little bit surprised at her behavior, or lack of good behavior. But anyhow, so I rented her the apartment, and I didn't see it for all the time that she was there. And it was furnished. It was a furnished apartment. So when the rental period came to an end, I went downstairs to see it. I was absolutely horrified. She'd ripped out all the wallpaper in the living room, the new wallpaper, and so you just saw the glue on the walls. She'd covered the wallpaper in the bathroom, which was very pretty. She'd covered it with white wallpaper with the paw prints of a leopard or some kind of cat. The light bulbs had all burnt out or something. She had candles. I mean, the building could have gone up in flames. I was absolutely horrified, but at that point I wasn't self-assertive enough to sort of demand sort of compensation. I was embarrassed for her. And I said, you know, what have you done? I mean, this is going to cost me so much money to have all these things restored. What on earth have you done to this apartment? She said, well, you can keep the air conditioner that I put in the bedroom. Well, I should have examined the air conditioner, because later on when my parents moved in, my father said it was noisy and it was a cheap air conditioner. It wasn't a good one. So, but I was so embarrassed for her, for Carrie, because I'd never been treated like that before. I didn't know people behaved like that. So that wasn't a very good experience. But a few years ago, Carrie Fisher was in a funny play, one-woman play on Broadway, where she talked about her family and Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor and her mother, and she was very funny. So I waited for her at the stage door, and I said, Miss Fisher, do you remember me? I was your landlady at one point, and you walked off with some of my belongings. You didn't steal them. I'm sure your boyfriend packed them. I had a wedding gift that was a barrel that you put ice into, and you could also sit on it. And I hope you still have it. I love that barrel. And she just gave me a sort of an incomprehending look, because I think sort of wasn't important for her. I don't know if she remembered me or not, but she signed the program. So that was the end of that experience. What else? Oh yes, at one point we bought an apartment on the top floor. It was a funny little apartment, again in rather bad shape, sort of dating back to the 1927 or something. And but it had a nice terrace and had the gargoyles, because the building has got these sort of medieval gargoyles here and there. So it had some gargoyles. And we were thinking that at that point, I think we decided to move out to Bronxville. So this would have been our pied-à-terre in New York. Eventually, the governor of New York, this was, I've forgotten at some point, we decided we didn't need a pied-à-terre. We sold it to Carey, Governor Hugh Carey. He was the governor of New York. He bought it from us, this apartment. So by now it is what? It is now 70, yeah, so Andy was born in 72. And we decided in 77 my parents moved from London to this apartment, which I'd had fixed up for them, re-wallpapered. And Daddy didn't like living in Manhattan. The Con Ed had dug up the street in front, and there was some kind of a big metal plaque on the road, and every time a car went by, it went boom, boom, boom. My father went crazy. So they decided to move to Bronxville, where we had friends, the Sulemirskis, and Dad went and bought an apartment there. And so then we decided, we were already thinking of moving out of the city, and we bought a beautiful house from, I think, dating from 1927 or something like that, in Bronxville on Elm Rock Road, number 27, was it? 24, something like that, 29 Elm Rock Road. Lovely house where each child had his own bedroom, bathroom. We had a swimming pool, a big garden. I was in seventh heaven. I didn't even have to go into the house to decide this was the house for me. All I needed was to see the garden and the trees, the old trees. Since it was an old house, it had old trees, beautiful roses, and it had a pergola, and it had dogwood and azaleas, and again, the swimming pool. So, and there's an attached garage for 2 cars with a big playroom above it and a bathroom. Perfect house. I loved it. So we bought that house about the same price as we sold the apartment for. And we sold our Manhattan apartment to a client of Dad's who was Greek, but of German. He looked more Germanic. Forgotten his name. Michael Kapsalis. That was it. Michael Kapsalis and his wife bought our apartment in Manhattan from us. I wish we could have kept it and sold it now. It was worth millions now. So we got I think the house and the apartment were roughly $160,000. One was maybe within $2,000 more or less than the other. So we moved to Bronxville. It was very happy time for a while. But so we moved towards the end of 77. And my brother was living in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta at that point. First of all, he was in Toronto, then he was in Calgary, Alberta. And a terrible thing happened. We'd only been there, you know, in Bronxville in, I think September 77, and in March of 78, my brother died. And that was such a blow. My mother was so happy. She finally moved to be in the same continent as her 2 children. She was so happy. And then this terrible thing happened. He was an engineer, a civil engineer. And so we all went to Alberta. Not the children, but my father, mother, my husband and I. We went to Calgary and for the funeral. And on the way back, we were flying, and my mother held the urn with my brother's ashes. And she was just totally, distraught. She had her eyes closed. She was holding this urn. And the steward went by, and he said to me, "Tell your mother that she can't hold that. She's got to put it under the seat, you know, because you always have to put bags." I said, "Don't worry, she won't drop it."
Where is he buried?
In Bronxville. Yeah, we found a lovely plot in a beautiful little cemetery in Bronxville, where the marble comes from Tuckahoe, which is the neighboring town. The Italians came over to dig the marble in Tuckahoe. And so, yeah, so it's a very pretty little cemetery, yeah, very pretty. And my mother, of course, took wonderful care of it. There were yellow roses and iris, purple iris and yellow roses over it.
And where Baba on Jajal?
So in '83, I think Daddy went back to England. By then, my divorce had started, so he went back to England in '83, and no, sorry, he went back I think in '81 or '82 and died in '83. So he's buried in Gunnersbury Cemetery. There are a lot of, it's in West London. A lot of Poles and some East Europeans are buried, and there's a monument to the Catton Forest massacre in that cemetery, Gunnersbury. And then my mother, Dad summoned my mother, you know, to go back to England with him. So, I mean, they went together. I'm making it sound as if they went separately. No, they went together, and back to England. And Mother got an apartment. First, they rented from a friend of theirs. They rented an apartment from a friend of theirs in Ealing Broadway, and then Mummy got an apartment in Ealing Broadway, a very nice, more modern apartment, and lived there alone. We visited her quite often, and my son lived with her for over a year, I think. Yeah, John lived with her for over a year when he was working in England, and then I visited quite often. And she died in '94. She died in '94, and she's buried too in Gunnersbury Cemetery, yeah.
Let's back up a second and some more memories of New York City with your three boys. What comes to mind randomly? Random thoughts, good behavior, bad behavior, things you like to do?
Oh yes, of course. The kids fought, which is natural. John would go by Roland and just touch him like this. So then Roland used that as an excuse to give him a teeny punch. So then John would say, "Oh look, Roland started, he punched me," boing. So there'd be a tussle. But Roland admired John. In many photographs, he's looking at John and, you know, his older brother. But John was cute. John had tremendous curiosity. He was, I think, the most curious of my children. You take him to the zoo, and he'd totally ignore the rhinoceroses and the elephants and the giraffes. He'd be down on the ground looking for bugs. He would, collecting bugs, at one point I bought him those little tiny boxes that had like a plastic cover that was a magnifying glass, so we'd put the bugs in there. And, oh, I forgot to mention, we bought a summer house in Chautauqua, upstate New York. Not Chappaqua, Chautauqua, upstate New York, on the Chautauqua Lake. And the people there admired him. They said, here's this child brought up in the city. He knows more about nature and bugs and things like that than kids brought up in the countryside. So I've got photographs of him always bent over, picking up little bugs or catching little fish or something. It's cute. And, you know, he and Roland got on as well as any two brothers separated by 2 years would get on. And then Andy was born when Roland was 5, so John would have been 7, and they used to gang up on Andy sometimes or make him do naughty things. And at one point I couldn't figure out why there was this strange stain on the carpet in front of our bedroom in Bronxville, and it turned out decades later, or 10 years later, I find out that they'd gotten him drunk and he'd thrown up on the carpet. That's what caused the stain. And there was also a stain on this shingle roof outside of Roland's bedroom in Bronxville. They each had their own bedroom, bathroom. And again, I couldn't figure out why there's this strange, sort of like as if something had bleached this area. And the roof wasn't that steep, it was sort of like that. And there was a little apple tree in front of it, and Roland came home late once, and I think he didn't want me to know that he was late or whatever. He climbed the apple tree and threw up on the shingle roof. Again, that sort of, I think I survived their childhood because a lot of the time I didn't know what they were doing. I just automatically thought that my kids wouldn't do naughty things, so drugs or whatever. So maybe it was good. They had a lot of freedom. And about 5, 6 years ago, I was in Bronxville, and a boy walked up to me. I was walking along looking at our old house, and he said, "Oh, you're Mrs. Rogers. I remember you. You're the mother who allowed your kids to jump out of the second-floor window into their swimming pool." Andy's room looked out again onto a roof, a shingle roof that sloped rather, not very steeply, like that. And then there was a path, and then there's the swimming pool. I wouldn't allow Andy to do it, but the big boys, John and Roland, would go, stand on the sill of the window and then just take a leap and go over the path into the swimming pool, and they were fine. I let them do it, but I didn't let their friends do it. And once, I think it was Roland who had his 10th grade, asked if they could use my property for their 10th grade party, knowing that I had a pool and I had a big front yard where they could have their barbecue, and I agreed. And again, John and Roland, I didn't know they'd do this, they showed off. They jumped out the window, so that's when that boy, I must have seen it. So my reputation must have not been very good, a mother who allows her kids to jump out of windows. But I think they had a pretty good childhood there. They were pretty happy. And the school was good. Roland remembers that the kids made fun of him for wearing two-tone shoes. He had very nice shoes from Tip Top Shoes on Broadway. They were leather, and I think they were tan in front and behind, and the middle part was dark blue. Very elegant shoes. And when Roland arrived at school, one of the boys said, "Oh, shoes," and everybody looked and made fun of poor Toad. We called him Toad because he loved, in Bronxville, not in Bronxville, in Chautauqua, we'd go to it was called the Chautauqua Ravine, I think. Chautauqua Ravine or Canyon, what was he called it? Chautauqua
Ravine.
Was it the ravine? We'd go to the ravine, and there'd be swim holes there. We'd be alone in these swim holes, and there'd these teeny little toads. And Roland would catch them and hold them, and he loved them so much, he actually loved them to death sometimes, because they got too warm in his hands. So we called him Toad. And I used to give him either a brass toad or a ceramic toad as a gift. I no longer do it, or send him a card with frogs or toads on it. Enough of that. I don't do it anymore. Let me think. I'm sort of jumping from one thing to another.
How about the birth of Andy?
Oh, yes. So John took 12 hours to be born. Roland was a false alarm at one point. Then he took 1.5 hours. And I had a wonderful doctor, Susan Williamson, who'd also delivered my sister-in-law's babies, Joanna Macy's babies. But unfortunately for my third child, Andy, who was born in '72, November the 2nd, '72, I had to have a different doctor, Dr. Lashinsky, because my doctor, Susan Williamson, was taking care of a friend who was dying of cancer. And he didn't pay any attention to my weight. The other doctor always told me, "You're getting too heavy," whatever. This doctor didn't, so I think, and my mother was there feeding me. So I was so big with Andy that everybody thought, when I came back from the hospital, that I'd present the building with triplets. Instead, I had one very large baby, 2 pounds heavier than John and Roland. John and Roland were a decent 7.5, roughly, pounds. He was 9.5 pounds. And he was so big and well developed, I expected him to be born at the end of September. He wasn't born till the 2nd of November. So I was sure he was too late, but the doctor informed me, no, he's fine. But with him I had to have a caudal, an injection in my back that sort of paralyzed me. It was okay. So anyhow, so that was Andy, and what can I say about him? He had lovely curly blonde hair. And when he was 3 or 4 years old, I think, I followed him in Chautauqua, taking pictures of him doing all kinds of things with his lovely curly blonde hair. They all had sort of blondish hair when they were young. John had straight hair. Roland's hair curled under. Whenever it got to a nice curl, he had it cut, which is a pity, because he had nice wavy hair. And Andy actually had curly hair when he was little. Now he's got straight hair. And it's dark, it's brown, sort of medium brown. And he was a very happy child, and copied his brothers, and as I say, they got him drunk, he threw up. But he has happy memories of Bronxville, so we lived there, let's see, from the end of '77, and then unfortunately the divorce began in April of '81, yeah, so '77. But they went to the school there. It's K through 12. It's only 1 square mile. The whole of Bronxville is just 1 square mile. It's just half an hour north of Manhattan. Very easy to get to by train. Very easy. A lot of interesting families. A lot of diplomatic families live there. And Japanese families, Dutch, Swiss. So 2 friends and I, Vivi Samaladas, who's Greek, and an Irish friend and I, Mary, and I formed a a club, not a club, a little society called the International Women's Club, and we had programs once a month. For instance, where the Japanese ladies came and demonstrated origami, the Swedish ladies talked about their Christmas, and the ladies wearing, I think, candles on their heads during a Christmas procession. That's right, we had a program about different countries' versions of Christmas. But I think since the Japanese at one point didn't have Christmas, they did something else. So we had these parties, or we took them somewhere. We went in a bus and went to the zoo, or we went to some botanical garden. So that was fun, organizing these programs. And then I did several jobs at the school, like I volunteered to help bind children's stories into books. I was a den mother for Andy. He had a little group of Cub Scouts. There were, I think, 8 of them. I used to drive them to an air show somewhere, and we did things in the garden. I always tried to do a lot of physical things with them, because I thought if they're at school sitting, you know, learning, they'll want to, boys especially, will want to do something physical. So the mothers are always grateful to me, because when the kids came home, they were spattered in mud, they were tired, they ate dinner, they went to bed. There was another mother who used to take them, and she charged them. I didn't charge. I charged maybe $5 for the whole season or something, and I gave them some refreshments. And this other mother charged like $5 each time there was a meeting, and she kept them in her basement, these little boys, cutting out doilies. You know, after sitting on their butts during a school day, they didn't want to be sitting on their bottoms cutting out doilies. So I think I did a good job as a den mother. And then there was a parade through Bronxville, and we had, I think it was Memorial Day, or late, was it? Yeah, probably Memorial Day, when you go and put flowers on the graves, and we had to wear our uniforms. So it was a happy time in Bronxville, and the boys liked it. As I say, they could walk everywhere. That's what I liked. I didn't have to drive them to school. They just went down the hill. And John's cat used to follow him, and the teachers would, Snoozy, a sort of orange cat, and the teachers would sometimes call me up and say, Mrs. Rogers, Snoozy's outside the classroom. And I'd have to go and pick up Snoozy. Rola's cat was a bit standoffish, but Snoozy was lovely. And then Andy eventually had a cat, a lady cat who got pregnant twice. I had to find homes for her kittens. When Roland was 2, it's funny, mothers always talk about when their children were, then they know the dates because they remember how old their children were. So Roland was 2. We were asked by the Fifth Avenue Presbyterian Church to go to some kind of meeting of Presbyterian, maybe leaders, in a place called Chautauqua. I'd never heard of Chautauqua, New York. So we went there, and we stayed, I think, in a hotel, and Roland he celebrated his 2nd birthday, I remember that, and John was 4, and of course Andy hadn't been born yet. And we liked it so much that same season we rented a house. At the top of Janes Avenue, there was a house that we rented, and we met a family with like 6 or 7 children. They lived above us, and I think we were down below. We rented that house for 2 seasons, and then I got pregnant with Andy. I remember seeing pictures of me pregnant with Andy sitting. By then we'd bought a house, 27 Janes Avenue. So we were right on the water. The streets went up kind of steeply from the water up, and we were on Janes Avenue. A cute little house. We painted it yellow, and it had white frames. It was a house dating, most of the houses dated from like 1890 something. Our house dated maybe from 1901 or 2, whatever. Nice little wooden house. And it was yellow, and it had black and white frames around the windows. It was 3 stories. Funny little house. So then I was pregnant with Andy. I remember there's a season I brought my parents over. That's right. They came and visited us, and they stayed in a hotel. And there was a long lake, about 20 miles long, and the kids thrived because there was a boys and girls club that they went to. They first of all went to a nursery school. Do you remember the nursery school? Do you remember it? And they enjoyed the nursery school. And and so I started taking different classes. I took a weaving class. I took a decoupage class. I took a pottery class. Why I didn't take art right away, I don't know. I kind of worked my way around the quadrangle. There was an arts quadrangle, 1 story, and they had grass in the middle with a huge tree, a big oak tree, and they had these classrooms around it with a lovely view down onto this lovely long lake. And you could see the other shore, because it was a long, narrow, skinny lake. You could see the other shore. Very pretty setting. So we were sort of out of doors mainly because the windows are often open, so you felt as if you're out of doors. Finally, I took an art class, and that's where I found my calling. And I started, we drew figures, we do a lot of still lifes, later on I began doing street scenes in Manhattan and selling my work, and I did portraits of people's houses, but I was mainly interested in doing street scenes of Manhattan with all the funny goings on, people rifling through the garbage, the dog peeing on the fire hydrant, that type of thing. So I started taking these art classes, and I'd rush home at lunchtime because the kids came home for lunch, so I made lunch for them and then sent them off again for the afternoon at the Boys and Girls Club. And the kids had what they had: canoeing, kayaking, swimming, archery, arts and crafts. They had to go over Thunder Bridge to get there. There was a bridge over this small ravine, and it was wooden, and when they rode their bicycles across it, it sounded like a bass drum or something, boing, 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 boing. And I remember John and Roland, especially John, would go and he'd find crayfish. He'd find crayfish there, and once he brought home in a little bucket a mother crayfish with like 16 babies on her back, and kept this in a bucket on the front porch. And in the middle of the night, I just couldn't take it. As a mother, my feelings went out towards this mother crayfish, and I took her. This was the middle of the night. I took her, and I put her on my bicycles and rode to the Thunder Bridge, and went down to the ravine and let the mother go with her babies. I saved a whole generation of crayfish. So so the boys went to the club, and Andy, I'm trying to think if he had the club, because maybe by then, let's see, he was born in '72, and the divorce started when he was 9. Yeah, so he must have had a year or so of the club. Oh yes, so I was pregnant. So I was pregnant when we were still at Jane's Avenue. So that would have been '72. So probably around maybe when Andy was just a year old. I can't remember exactly when we got our really beautiful house on South Lake Drive, because we bought this gorgeous house. I think we were the envy of many of our neighbors because we got this beautiful house that had been built for a family called Chess. They were from Pennsylvania, and they made makeup, I think. Chess, I think, was their name. Beautiful 3-story house, rambling house, all white with a dark blue tile roof, a huge tree growing over it, and it was it was on the lake, but separated by what we turned into a little, not a putting green, a croquet. We played croquet on it. Then there was a path, and then there was the lake with all its boats, and there was a sports club. So we had this lovely view onto the lake, and we could sit on the porch and drink. Now, in the deed of the house, because Chautauqua was dry, in the deed of the house it says we're not allowed to have alcoholic drinks or something. Well, nobody paid any attention as long as you didn't, go around 3 sheets to the wind with a bottle of rum in your hand. People didn't mind. You drank your gin and tonic in a little teacup. Nobody minded. And so we bought the house with all the furniture. It was sold by a woman who had worked for the previous owners, because the Chess family only owned it for a while. I think the house dated from like 1885, I think it was built. I think so. And it had a turret. The boys had the turret room, a funny little staircase. It only had 1 bathroom and a powder room, so that was a bit inconvenient, but it didn't really matter much. But nice big rooms downstairs, octagonal shape, sort of old-fashioned kitchen, laundry room, and it had a separate plot behind it, which was very useful because we could keep our car or cars on that separate plot. Other people had to park their cars outside the gate and then come in through the gate. We could park right behind the house, which was a great convenience. So moving into that house was great. I loved that house. And Andy had his own room. John and Roland were upstairs in the turret. And there were 2 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. So we had a guest room and then our John and my bedroom. What was I going to say about the house? I've forgotten.
And there was a house in between.
Oh yes, so the previous owners were the WCTU. The WCTU is the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the anti-alcohol ladies. And when we bought the house, the lady who sold it to us was their housekeeper, and they for some reason gave the house to her. as some kind of compensation. Maybe they hadn't paid her, I don't know. So she owned that house. But the Women's Christian Temperance Union had moved out a long time before. But in going up the stairs on this nice wood-paneled wall was a portrait of the foundress of the WCTU, a very dour-looking lady who looked as if no rum had ever passed her lips. She had sort of a monocle. She was wearing a monocle. She looked very, very severe. So there's her portrait. And so in the deed, when we bought the house, it said that the Women's Christian Temperance Union was allowed to visit the house once a year on a certain date, a certain month. So we always made certain when these ladies came to visit their former house that we put back the portrait, because I didn't like that portrait of that woman. I've forgotten her name. We used to hide it in the closet and put up a nice Maxfield Parrish scene of children on a swing. So I quickly put back the dour lady and also hid the rum and the gin bottles. We didn't drink much, but whatever we drank, we hid when they came. So that was kind of funny. And we bought the house with its furnishings. Old-fashioned sofas, and I always remember at one point we were sitting eating in the little dining area next to the kitchen, and this little chipmunk comes through the dining area and goes under the couch. It had made a nest there. And the couch was much too heavy to move, so we allowed the little chipmunk to live there. So we had a little chipmunk's nest, and there was another couch opposite it, and there were very comfortable furniture, old-fashioned furniture. The porch had all these swinging chairs, rocking chairs, all painted white. That was very comfortable. And we didn't have to buy any furniture. I think we brought in our own carpets, obviously our own china, stuff like that, some odds and ends, but on the whole, it was the furniture we bought the house with. Okay, so we were there, well, I think the house wasn't sold. I mean, the divorce started in '81, so I came back twice during the divorce and lived in the house when Dad wasn't there with the Gallaghers. But then the house was sold. I can't remember the year it was sold in. Do you remember what year it was sold in? I can't remember. But you used to go there for quite a while, didn't you, in the '80s? You still went there. And at one point, Dad and this couple had a boat that was on the lake, and I think Andy became like a little mascot. They had these girls who came from places like Brazil to learn how to live on a boat and how to sail it, and Andy became their little mascot. I would have preferred him to go to the Boys and Girls Club rather than have all these girls, you know, treating him like a little lord. My gosh, of course. Chautauqua was founded on a religious educational basis by one of the Miller family. Miller, who's a bishop and a descendant of Edison, correct? Correct, yeah. There were two guys. One was a bishop, I think he was the Miller, and Louis Miller, and the other one was from the Edison, the lamp bulb guy, you know, the inventor Edison. And they had a cottage on the ground, so the cottage is all dated from the 1890s, whatever, 1880s, 1890s. And these two men had the idea that they wanted teachers in America to know the latest methods, audio, visual, the latest, most modern methods of teaching. So they set up this summer. It was originally just a summer camp. It was on Lake Chautauqua. It was very difficult to get to. You had to get there by boat. I think the road hadn't been built yet. There was no train service or anything like that. So it was kind of difficult to get to. And originally the houses were built where the tents had been. They had pitched tents, and maybe they'd made a little kitchen. Maybe they had something made out of stone, and they pitched the tent next to it. But bit by bit, the tents gave way to little cottages. So some of the cottages are very quaint, very cute, with barge boards, cut-out barge boards. One will be pink, one will be white, one will be blue. Our house, we eventually we painted in the original sort of Victorian colors, you know, maybe a bit of puce, maybe a bit of sort of in-between colors. Because it originally was, when we bought it, was just all white. So eventually people began building larger houses, especially along the waterfront. The richer people had these bigger houses. And then people began building more, you know, more permanent homes and going there, not just in the summer, but in the autumn. And some people even live there all year round. But the summer population is always much larger, much larger. There's a huge hotel there, very old-fashioned. I think it's the largest wooden hotel east of the Mississippi, a huge hotel called the Athenaeum. The Athenaeum. There's an amphitheater built with a big roof, seats several thousand people, but open to the side, so you'd hear, oh, and orchestras would come. We'd get members of the Boston Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, some other Philharmonic, they'd get together, and they always wore blue blazers and white pants, and we had a wonderful orchestra. We had famous conductors. Oh dear, Susan C. Handel, with Walter Handel. His daughter was a ballerina. She danced in the ballet. We had Peter Martins come with some members of the New York City Ballet. Susan Handel, I remember seeing them rehearsing. You could go and watch them rehearse and then see them that evening. I remember once when Peter Martins was rehearsing with Suzanne Farrell. I was the only one in the amphitheater, and I got a bit too close to them, and he gave me a big glare. So I moved back. So, he didn't want me sort of staring at them as they're rehearsing. But I love watching rehearsals. I like seeing the work that goes into what looks like so effortless a performance. I like seeing the sweat and the tears that go into it. It interests me. So I sat further back and watched them rehearsing. So at least twice, if not 3 times, there'd be a concert in the amphitheater. Sometimes it would be a popular concert. I mean, like Dolly Parton. And you get these huge buses that would turn up with their stereophonic equipment, much too loud, and these popular, and then the kids would sit there listening, and then there'd be all this stereophonic equipment, and my kids would be in the front row listening, and I went and got them these earphones or whatever to block out the noise. I don't know if they wore them that much. But
it was the Chuck Mangione concert.
Chuck Mangione concert, yeah.
And you came with my shooting ear blocker, what's it called? To protect,
yes,
ear
because
protection.
John liked shooting in ranges, and he came with the ear. Did you wear them? The Chuck
Well, you
Mangione?
came and embarrassed us
Oh,
by trying to make us all.
Oh, that's
sit
right.
there.
I embarrassed you. I made you wear these. Well, the noise was deafening. It was deafening. And then there'd be classical concerts and classical ballet. It was everything. And then they had one guy who we knew brought in these. What do you call when you sing in harmony?
Barbershop.
The barbershop quintets, whatever quartets would come, and the whole concert was just barbershop quartets, and so we had everything, a bit of everything. Then there was a hall Norton Hall, where opera was performed. I mean, serious opera.
Wasn't Roland in one of them?
Roland was in a play. They had serious opera and a play. He was in Get Rich Quick Wallingford, a play by George M. Cohan, I think. And all he had to do was to come on stage and blow a raspberry, I think, do that or something. He was so unself-conscious that he came on stage, but he wanted to make sure that we were watching him. So he made sure we were looking at him, and then he went and ran up stage. It was so cute. It was so funny. Yeah, so the kids, it was great because, for instance, one day I'm outside my house, and I see a young girl, one of John's friends, comes up to me and says that there's a duck that has a problem with its beak. I think she maybe even have caught it, and I think she gave it to me. And this poor duck had a fishing hook stuck in its beak. Well, I knew that I wouldn't be able to hold the duck and get some implement, so I see this man walking along. And I asked him for his help. It turned out later, he was singing later on in Beethoven's opera Fidelio. He was singing in it, but at that point I didn't know. I just said, "Hey, can you help me?" And I said, "Please go to the back of my house, and there's a shed, and then you'll see there's some tools there." And he brought out some kind of clippers or something, and this girl was standing next to us, and I held the duck. And it took the guy quite a while. It wasn't an easy thing. He had to clip it and somehow work it. And the duck I was amazed. This duck, as if it knew. I think the duck had even waddled up to the girl, and I've noticed this, that animals sometimes know that we have a superior brain, that we can help them. This duck didn't move at all. It didn't fight to get out of my arms, and the man removed it. It took quite a while, and I got the girl to get some bread, and because I thought maybe the duck hadn't eaten for a while since it had this hook in its beak. I put the duck on the ground and spread the bread, and the duck very calmly ate the bread, and then waddle, went in the lake, quack, 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 and at that point, 4 little ducklings came out from under a boat and waddled off with her. I mean, swam off with her. It was so cute. She'd hidden her ducklings, asked for help, had her meal, and went off with her baby. It was so cute.
I took a picture in the Daily of the girl with it. I'll look through my archives. I got a picture of her holding it.
I'd like to see that.
I'll dig it out. I'll edit it into the...
I never knew about that. I find out all these things later on.
What about just general memories, playing on the lake, going to places like Midway, exploring the countryside, horseback riding?
Andy and I took a course in riding. I bought a second-hand windsurfer, And Andy and I took lessons, and we had to pass a test. And we had to be able to take down the sail in the middle of the lake, take down the sail if the wind was blowing, furl it, and then lie on the
Oh wait, hang on a
sail.
second.